For fans of lost media, I like to divide them into two categories. One side you have your movie buffs, your TV enthusiasts, clinging to rediscover more about their favourite programme or movie. On the other spectrum, you have those that are morbidly fascinated upon material that seemingly would be on bad taste to publicly show. If there's one subject within the lost media community that brings these two together, it would have to be the lost horror projects. It crosses over with two of the other interests. Being a film or show, it emulates the nostalgia for individuals to pleasurably enjoy. Getting to see a rumour deleted scene may offer them a new perspective on the whole project. And then for the morbidly curious, that maybe it could have been a project that was so horrifically frowned upon with its original release that it was either censored or straight up banned. A macabre fascination of seeing, well, what you're not meant to see. So today, we're going to be counting down, not 5, neither 10, but the top 20, either partially missing or completely lost horror flicks. If this sounds like your cup of tea, then don't forget to subscribe so you won't be missing out. Check out our other mini documentaries about more missing media. That shall do for the context. Let's start this list. Since the day of publication, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein has always remained to be a deeply controversial story due to the narrative theme of playing God. Even 113 years later, by the time of the Karloff movie, attitudes were still not favourable towards the story. In its native country of America, opinions would vary from state to state, some outright banning the movie, while others requested edits to the more controversial elements. But by its 1938 re-release, the Hays Code, which had sought out censorship in Hollywood, would demand some more permanent edits upon its wider release. This included Fritz's torture of the monster, a close-up on the injection needle, and the monster's accident with the little girl Maria, mistakenly believing that she'll float on the water just like the daisies. By the mid-80s, a full film print with many of these missing scenes was rediscovered in the UK. Very shortly afterwards, they were made available on home media, although one scene was still tampered by censorship. In the scene that Dr. Frankenstein proclaims that his creation is alive, he goes on to say, "In the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God," with the line being directly blasphemous. In the censor cut, lightning sound effects were placed on top, so you couldn't hear Henry's Frankenstein's last sentence. "In the name of God, now I know what it..." But by the time it came out on DVD, the film was fully restored back to its pre-censor cut, including Dr. Frankenstein's last bit of sentence. "In the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God." Little Shop of Horrors was a 1986 horror musical comedy, which was an adaptation of the musical by the same name, which the theatre production was based on the 1960 black comedy, The Little Shop of Horrors, probably the first black comedy of its kind. Both following projects took their own spin on the concept, with the musical portraying the main characters as empathetic but somewhat distasteful, getting their comeuppance by the end of the show. The movie version was going to follow the same ending, with both main leads being killed off. But with the characters reshaped to be more humbling than dislikable, the bleak ending with Audrey 2 succeeding didn't go down well with test audiences, so a new ending was devised for the theatrical run. Audrey 2 was defeated, and both main stars live happily ever after, but the original ending for decades was inaccessible. By the time of the internet culture during the 2000s, a black and white work print was circulating featuring the original ending. In 2012, a Blu-ray release would see a director's cut to the movie, featuring the intended ending. The Dream Woman is a lost 1914 horror drama. The main character of the piece, Francis Raven, is having nightmares of a lady coming to kill him, repeatedly having the same dream, feeling ever so more real every time. Later in life, he finds himself meeting and settling down with a nice lady called Alice. Although, as things start to go down in their relationship, the drama in his personal life begins to reflect his nightmares. The film ends with Francis in the afterlife. The film was based on the novel by the same name, with the same author penning the screenplay. 101 years later, the film was partially remade in 2015's The Forbidden Room, but as of today, the only remnants that are left of the original film are 14 stills. Monster of Frankenstein was the third known Frankenstein adaptation made back in 1920s Italy. There's very little information to go off about this movie. We know that it was distributed around Europe. Several different languages did exist for the film, and apparently it was a rather obscene movie for its time, with film censors cutting out a huge portion of the film, reducing the runtime to 39 minutes. Only one still is currently available from the production, and well, who knows if that will ever change in the future. Voodoo Heartbeat was a unique take on the vampire genre, made back in 1973, filmed in Vegas. The plot features the USA secretly making a serum of youth. Dr. Blake gets his hand on the medicine, but after consuming it, it drains him of all his blood. Now he craves blood to stay alive. As of today, it's never been released on home media, with only the movie's trailer publicly accessible to view. From the mid to late 1910s, there were a trilogy of golem movies, inspired from the Jewish mythology of the golem, created out of clay and brought to life to protect the Jewish people, although the creation soon rebels against its creator and goes on a murderous rampage. Paul Wegener was the writer, director, and starred as the golem in all three movies. Today, only the third 1920s movie is available. The first 1915 film, about 3 minutes, had resurfaced in 2007. The middle film of the trilogy, The Golem and the Dancing Girl, was a standout compared to the other two films, as it was a direct parody of the original, being more the kin of a romantic comedy. The golem of the piece is not a supernatural being, but just some chap dressed up as the golem, flirting with a girl that's got a thing for the golem story. Both of these films allegedly still exist in some form, although this has never been officially verified. Nobody Ordered Love. It's a lost 1972 British drama. Fictional director Paul Medbury is having trouble shooting his First World War epic. Because of his actress Alice Alliston, it's being rather troublesome on set. He's desperate to get rid of her on the production. Well, things finally go his way, but not in the way that he wanted, as Allison commits suicide. Caroline Johnson is cast as the replacement actress, although she didn't get the role easily, as she had to sleep with the producer to get it. By the end, Medbury, who is distasteful on the higher-ups, as an act for revenge, destroys the print. The director, Harford David, intended to capture the real-life nightmares of creating a horror picture, although upon release, there wasn't a lot of promotion for the film, only having a very small run and very quickly being retracted from cinemas. From the few that did see it, they didn't find it to be all that brilliant to begin with. In Davison's will, he requested that all copies of the film to be disposed of. Today, the BFI has placed it under their 75 most wanted lost titles. A script has since resurfaced in 2012, donated to the BFI by a private collector. The Werewolf, made by Universal in 1913, perhaps the first werewolf movie. The plot follows a Native American girl resurrected 100 years later, with the ability to transform into a wolf. She's off on a personal revenge mission to hunt down the reincarnation murderer of the chap that killed her boyfriend a century ago. The film ran for a span of 2 reels and 18 minutes, and the last known copy was believed to be destroyed back in 1924. This is sadly another production where the only remnants left is one grainy image. The Monkey's Paw was an RKO picture released back in 1933, featuring a group of individuals having a monkey paw that can grant 3 wishes, although with dire consequences, based on the 1902 story by the same name, although expanding the story greatly, such as a backstory for the monkey paw and a twist ending. The film saw a stop-motion scene with the monkey paw coming to life. When it was re-released during the Hays Code time, this scene was removed out. Today, the film no longer exists in its original state, with the film partially surviving thanks to a French dub. Hammer collaborating with Universal back in the 1960s would see Universal photographing new scenes for TV airings of the movie, although they were only ever seen in the US, and Hammer had no involvement with these alternative versions. The US TV scenes would have new characters that wouldn't interact with the main cast. In fact, they wouldn't harken much bearing or influence on the plot. They would mostly offer a 10-minute diversion from the main storyline, although, when it came time to feature Hammer's Phantom of the Opera for television, there was extensive new footage that was filmed, a new subplot for the story with 2 police officers, gathering items and trying to suss out the clues, and additionally a murder subplot trying to kill off Mistress Lord Amber Darcy, making the runtime from 84 to 98 minutes. But beyond the 60s, this TV version hasn't seen much airing. "1931 was surely a monumental year for horror history, as Universal released both black and white classics, Frankenstein and Dracula. Not the first adaptation of both stories, and far from the last, but both classics have certainly been hard to top. As we've said for the 31 Frankenstein, there were many scenes that were cut upon release and re-releases. Dracula, released earlier that year, was no exception. Fortunately for us, today on home media, Dracula's been mostly restored back to its original version, barring the ending epilogue, spoken by Van Helsing. A small bit of footage did reappear in the Road to Dracula documentary, but it's never been cleaned up or placed back into the movie. Universal has never given any confirmation if this will ever be feasible. Cannibal Holocaust was a 1980s found footage horror. The killings of the movie were so seemingly authentic that it was banned in Britain and Italy for believing to be a straight up snuff film. It was so controversial that the director was arrested and was deeply questioned about the film, having to explain the grisly special effects, and bringing the actors into court, proving that they were still alive. This is probably the only horror movie where it was just as scary behind the scenes. While the film is mostly available around the globe, there's an infamous deleted scene that was actually never finished. The removed sequence saw the tribe sacrificing one of their members to the piranhas by slowly lowering him into the water. The piranhas were difficult to control, and the underwater camera was malfunctioning. The scene didn't quite pan out as the crew intended, so it was never fully finished. What was filmed of the piranha scene has never been released. Draculas Death was a 1921 Hungarian film, being the oldest known Dracula movie. The plot was very separate from the novel, being about a lady called Mary who is locked up in an insane asylum, being stalked by a fella who claims to be Dracula, who then tries to kidnap her and to force her into an elaborate marriage. There were 2 different versions of the film, with Mary being played by 2 separate actresses, although both versions now are lost, with only 3 grainy images remaining from the feature. Hammer released their first installment of their Dracula series in 1958, starring Peter Cushing as Van Helsing and Christopher Lee as the title character. Despite coming back in nearly all of the sequels, he wasn't inherently pleased with any of the scripts. Although being such a driving force for the marketing of the film, Hammer Studios would always pressurize him, telling him that if he didn't come on board, then loads of people would be out of a job. Hammer's version of Dracula would elevate the character in a new vulgar way of horror. This was easily the first Dracula movie to show Dracula having a sexual desire, although ordered by the censors, much of the sexual tension was cut out. The finale of the movie saw Dracula trapped and decaying in the sun, with a huge debate between Hammer and the censors as to how much of the grisly scene should be shown. For decades, it was believed that the extended shots were lost forever, but fortunately an extended reel was rediscovered in Japan, and after a lengthy and long restoration effort, the film is finally back to its original state. There are truly not many films of its age to have a monumental lucky find, just to go to show that once in a while, we do have a miracle of a rediscovery. Hammer's 1957 Curse of Frankenstein would see the launch of the studio's long list of horror movies, as well as Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing's marriage to the horror genre, and rebirthing the story of Frankenstein for a new generation, now in colour and with no Hays office to lean on the questionable morals. Sort of. In the film, the way that Dr. Frankenstein disposes of the bodies is by his acid bath, with one grim scene where we get to see a head disintegrate, with this scene alone warranting the film its X rating. The face was created by Phil Leakey, who was additionally behind the creature makeup in the movie, but after its theatrical release upon other showings, the BBFC requested its removal, and has since never reappeared anywhere else. Famous cult TV actor Patrick Troughton had a small bit part in Curse of Frankenstein, but those scenes got refilmed with another actor. When Hammer Studios went down during the late 70s, it additionally brought down their film archive, which homed many of the original negatives to their films. So any glimmer of hope of the Troughton or Head scene surviving beyond the 50s were likely disposed of by Hammer's shutdown. In the 21st century, Hammer's been on a worldwide search, trying to track down the original version. For classic horror fans, the dissolving head is perhaps the most sought after out of all of Hammer's missing scenes. "1925's Phantom of the Opera has such a convoluted background that just trying to summarise it for a top 10 list, I can't truly do it justice. It really warrants its own subject video to explain, so not to go in too much detail, but basically today there's two different versions of the movie. There's the Eastman print that was reproduced back in the 50s, that exists on 35mm, although John Hampton did a reconstruction of the movie using a 16mm source. The picture quality is rather poor compared to the Eastman print, although it does surpass it in runtime, although neither of these cuts are truly the original Phantom as seen in 25. During the duration of the 20s, there were several different versions of the same movie, a pre-release cut with a more dignified ending for the Phantom, and a partially sound version. We could really go into great depth, but we've got 4 more slots to cover, so let's move on. But like I said, one day I will go back and give it its proper mini documentary. The 1932 Freaks was a deeply controversial film upon release, being banned in many states. The plot of the film is centered on a freak show, with the residents being played by real handicapped people. At the time of its release, sentiments towards the freak show were frowned upon. Many people presumed that this was a film making fun of disabled people, but the film is greatly grounded. The handicapped actors are seen outside of the shows and the performances. The plot really centers on an able-bodied person called Cleopatra trying to get married to Hans, a little person that runs the circus, but she's only interested in his money. By the end, the rest of the performers retaliate against Cleopatra. After release, the film was greatly re-edited. The removal of many sequences were mainly with the freak actors, trimming out conversation pieces that humanized them even more, and completely deleting out Cleopatra's grisly bashing. The film went from 90 minutes to 60 minutes. Today, only the hour cut remains of the movie. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman initially started as a joke. But Universal saw potential with the concept, so they got to work crossing over both their most lucrative movies of the day, the Wolfman and the Frankenstein series. Perhaps easily the first crossover movie of its type, which by the time of the 21st century we've been so spoiled by the MCU movies. Putting aside the confusing title, as it's the Doctor that's called Frankenstein who is nowhere to be seen in the film, but then yet again, the monster meets the Wolfman doesn't really have as a good ring to it. The movie was scripted to follow the continuity of both characters, with Larry Talbot being resurrected and longing to be dead forever, putting an end to his werewolf curse. And then in the last prior Frankenstein film, Ghost of Frankenstein, saw the monster's brain being swapped out by Igor's, which by surgical complications renders the monster blind. Bela Lugosi played the Frankenstein monster, a role that he turned down a decade prior. When the film was test screened, the audience laughed at Bela Lugosi's Hungarian accent, so all the monster's dialogue was removed in the final cut, eliminating the explanation as to why he walked so awkwardly, being because that he was blind. This unfairly gave criticism towards Lugosi's performance. Since the 80s, there's been a hard search for a pre-release cut of Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, but nearly 40 years on, nothing has turned up. Only briefly available for a short time, the first day showing of The Shining featured a slightly different ending, an epilogue just after we see Jack frozen in the snow, set at a hospital, with the hotel manager telling Wendy that they couldn't find Jack's body, nor anything distinctly unusual at the hotel. This was the edit that the director signed off on, although clenching at the last minute, Stanley Kubrick contacted 2 editors to go to the dozen theatres that already had The Shining showing, to personally splice out the hospital scene. This was because he preferred a reaction from the audience that didn't have this scene included. Exactly what happened to the extinguished footage is unknown. Deleted scenes of Kubrick movies have been somewhat back and forth upon their confirmation if they still exist. Rumours persist that Kubrick in his will requested for any unused footage to be destroyed from his films. But then we do know that an extended cut of his classic film 2001 does still exist. Regardless if deleted scenes still exist or not, Kubrick's estate would simply never allow it. 1927 London After Midnight easily stands as one of the most desired and sought after lost movies, starring man of a thousand faces Lon Chaney Jr., who plays a detective trying to suss out a murder mystery by disguising himself as a vampire, terrifying the subjects into confession. Upon release, the film was in infamy as a man by the name of Robert Williams, proclaiming that the film London After Midnight, the character of Lon Chaney, traumatized him so much that he went on a murderous rampage. The judge rolled his eyes and called his bluff. But that court case alone seemed to cement the movie into a controversial flick. The last known copy of London After Midnight was destroyed in a vault fire at the MGM archives. Over the decades, various fragments have reappeared, such as the script and several frames of the nitrate film, although a full print has yet to have been rediscovered. And sadly, if it's left unattended, film will naturally just decay away, for a film that's nearly 100 years in age. As every year goes by, it seems less and less unlikely that we'll ever get to see again London After Midnight. But who knows, hopefully, maybe I'm wrong.